Joining us now from New Zealand is the CEO of Perpetual Guardian, the pioneer of the 4-day workweek, Andrew Barnes. His book, The 4-Day Week, documents the benefits of this 4-day week on productivity, profitability, and well-being. You can order it from 4dayweek.com. Andrew Barnes, thank you for joining us.
Hi, how are you?
I'm all the better for hearing about this great experiment, which appears to be a win-win for business and win for employees.
Yeah, look, that's exactly right. I mean, I approach this with the language of business because when I started looking at this, my problem was to try and understand how I measured productivity in my company and try to understand why productivity was actually not as good as it might have been. And this was an experiment to address that then had all the spin-off effects of benefiting the staff.
Right. So you did this experiment, I believe, 2018, and productivity went up during the experiment and stayed up since then, I imagine?
Yeah, absolutely. So we found that our productivity went up about 25% throughout the trial process, but actually it stayed up since. And in fact, when we benchmark ourselves against our biggest competitor here, we are twice as productive on a per capita basis than our biggest competitor. And that's, quite a significant improvement.
Yeah, so I suppose there are multiple benefits to that, not only from a productivity perspective, but also from a cost perspective, because pre-COVID, you were probably using the office less, but also I imagine you have to hire fewer people to get the same amount of output done.
Well, we decided that the way we were going to approach it was not about reducing staff. That is actually one of the problems that you have when you introduce the policy, because naturally employees think, actually, what's he going to do? He's going to find we can work harder, we can work better, then he'll get rid of 20% of us and there'll be cost improvements. We decided not to do that. So we do what we call the 100-80-100 rule. 100% pay, 80% time, provided we get 100% productivity. So at least the same level of productivity. And the idea behind that was not to reduce costs of employees, but was to recognize that actually if you had a refreshed, healthy, happy, engaged workforce, and if you empowered them to do things differently, then you would get better productivity. And essentially, we handed the problem to the staff and said, what would you do differently if you had to do your job in 4 days rather than 5?
Right. And I imagine a lot of it comes down to, I'd spend less time at the water cooler. Meetings would be like much more to the point, less chit chat, that kind of thing. And that's enabled productivity to flourish.
Yeah, look, that's exactly right. What you have is that the open plan office, especially if we're talking at offices, is possibly the most inefficient space that's ever been designed for business. You get interrupted statistically once every 11 minutes. It takes you 22 minutes then to get back to full productivity. So what we did here is we said, right, we will re-engineer things. We'll give people quiet hours. We will shorten meetings. The great Microsoft experiment from Japan, 5 people in a meeting, no more than half an hour per meeting, and a 39.9% improvement in productivity. There's a lot of busy time when you're at work. I'd rather talk to you about shit than I would write this boring report that I've got over here. So we find that that's what happens. We also found, interestingly, that internet surfing on the top 5 non-business sites in New Zealand dropped 35% when we introduced the trial. So people are saying, I'd rather go home than go on Facebook.
Yeah. Whereas pre-experiment, they're visiting Facebook or whatever it is just to fill the time.
Yeah, and calls come in, and the person who's sitting having a really interesting conversation with a partner on the phone is way more interesting than what you're doing. Lots and lots of little interruptions. So by removing those interruptions, you got better productivity. And the start point for me was a British survey which said that the Brits were only productive for 2.5 hours a day. True productivity. And the Canadians in the same survey were 1.5 hours a day. And so all I'm saying is actually, if you can reorder things, theoretically, I needed to get 45 minutes more productivity in each of 4 days to get the same amount of productivity as I would have got in 5.
Yeah. So on productivity, based on what employees value in terms of work-life balance, based on profitability costs, all the metrics, from what I can gather, please correct me if I'm wrong, but from what I can gather, this experiment has been a huge win. And so, and I know there's always going to be kind of reasons for this not to take off in every enterprise in New Zealand or anywhere else, but what barriers you've encountered from, you know, your competitors or other enterprises who have heard about this? Because it's been well publicized from kind of...
Yeah, look, I guess there are two things. First of all, the biggest opponents to this are managers, leaders, directors, because they have been conditioned. We have been conditioned. Working longer is working harder. Time in the office is a surrogate for productivity. Now, of course, COVID's changed that. COVID has now meant that we've sent our people home. Hey, they still worked. Who'd have thought? We didn't need to supervise them. Actually, we found that productivity went up. Hey, who'd have thought that too? When you actually don't have the pressures of the daily commute, when actually it's quieter and you can do more productivity. So that argument's probably gone now, which was, can I trust my people? I think the other barrier that we had is that people didn't understand what productivity was. So my call here was, by understanding what was productivity, I could then measure it, I could see the improvement, but we didn't bother. 9 times out of 10, I will talk to a company and I will say, well, how do you measure productivity? And they'll go, well, it's about the time we spend in the office. It's not, right? Time is not the issue. It's output that is the issue.
Right.
So now we've got over those two barriers, the fact we can trust our staff and the fact that we've sort of got a better understanding of productivity. Now it's harder to argue against this. And I think that's why we're starting to see bigger companies all over the world come out, they start downloading our white paper and start a conversation about how they can introduce it in their business.
Yeah, because, well, it's ultimately self-beneficial, if that's even a word.
Oh, look, it is. I mean, let's go out on a limb here. If you have a healthy, happier, more engaged, more enthusiastic, more resilient staff, are you going to get better or worse productivity? I mean, how hard is that, right? I mean, it's just not rocket science. So the only reason that I am viewed as a madman is because I say to people, you will get better productivity by allowing your team to work less. But everything else I'm talking about is about better time management, better office design, better cross-training, resilience. These, and it's not just my company that's seen the benefits. Broadly, every company that does this is seeing an improvement of between 25 and 40% in productivity. Well, as a leader, you almost have an obligation to try this.
Yeah.
Your biggest threat is going to be your biggest competitor doing it first.
Right, and getting more from their employees. I know that earlier this year, New Zealand's Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern gave a very brief shout out to this concept as a means to promote domestic tourism in this age of COVID.
Mm-hmm.
Have you seen any more interest in this concept from the government in New Zealand or from other enterprises since she gave it a shout out?
Realistically, no. I mean, I think obviously it was right in the heart of the COVID period, but you are seeing practically in Australia and New Zealand a big uptake in this now. Probably more in Australia, I have to say, than we're seeing in New Zealand. But the conversation is now starting. We've gone from being a lunatic fringe 2 years ago to a topic that now is being discussed at a government level, in Australia, in New Zealand, in the UK, in the United States. We're seeing it in France. We're seeing it in Italy, in Austria. It's now very mainstream. And I think what we will see over the next 2 years is a real shift towards this. And there are interesting schemes, the Kurzarbeit in Germany, similar project in France. The UK Chancellor has just been talking about a similar scheme for the UK, where I think you will start to see a 4-day week with some government contribution coming in as a method for us to get out of the recessions caused by COVID. So I think we'll see a lot of movement over the next couple of years.
Okay. That's something to look forward to, hopefully, for the workforce and for enterprises. One of the things we touched upon was that there's a lot less kind of idle chatter about the workplace in a 4-day week compared to a 5-day week. Do you find that kind of might weaken some of the bonds that some employees have when they catch up over their personal lives at the workplace?
Well, actually, no. The best way I can describe this is tell a little bit of a story. We allow our people to do, they can take a day off, 2 half days, they can come in late, go home early, which is often happens with parents of children. But I have a chap in one of my offices who is a grandfather. He takes 2 afternoons a week off. So he walks home, he gets fit, he sees his granddaughter, and they spend time together that afternoon. They have tea together, and then she goes home. And when he tells the story, he cries, because I'm giving him something that he would never, ever have the chance to do. Now, the point about our team thing is it's a team opt-in. So one, you can see that he will do absolutely everything possible to keep the 4-day week. This is too precious to him. But his colleagues can see what it means to him, and he can see what their time off means to them. They are not going to prejudice this, and they are sharing all of those other things, those other bits of their lives. And so what we found was that when we monitored team cohesion, teamwork, we found that those scores have gone up and stayed up, because actually they've now got something to share, something that makes them feel, that they're all in this together. So it's actually counterintuitive. It improves it. And I think the other thing to say is, we're not saying don't chat around the water cooler. If you use the Brits example, 2.5, 3 hours a day productivity, if you've got a 7-8 hour day, there's still 5 hours to hang around chatting around the water cooler, right? This is not about creating a bunch of monks. It is actually about making the time that you're working more efficient. Doesn't say that you don't socialize. COVID is a bigger attack on the social construct of a company than this was.
Right. It's a fascinating experiment. It's encouraging to see the results. One last question, which is slightly tangential. I'm in the US, you're in New Zealand, and it feels like things are going pretty backward pretty quickly. And so in the event that things go kind of off the cliff, would you adopt me, and can I be your surrogate son in New Zealand?
Yes, but the trouble is that the government's locked the borders, and even if you were my surrogate son, it would be very hard to get you in. But I would be putting your name down in the queue for 2022.
I can wait that long. I'll take it. All right, Andrew, thank you so much for joining us. It's a fascinating experiment. And it could be, as you alluded to, the start of a new wave of examining productivity in the workplace. But thank you very much for joining us.
You're welcome.